So this tree, in 2 hours, I might be able to get this completed. What I specialise in doing a lot of detail work. A lot of carvers will do block work, which is the rough carving, but I like to do the very fine details, turning flat cuts like these into euro or holes like owl holes. Put some nice delicate lines all over the tree. That's my kind of speciality. Now there's a couple of different types of carving. We have the machines, so we have the Dremel and the larger machine, the Makita, which are very good for working on deciduous trees, anything that's non-resinous or non-fibrous. I tend to use machines on. If you use chisel carving, which is more pines and junipers, the tearing technique is very good for those. But once the wood becomes hard and dry, it becomes brittle and snaps, and you can create problems with the cracking. You're kind of opening up areas where water can sit in the wood and rot away. So I tend to use machines because they leave a smoother appearance on the outside, and water can shed out that way. So this tree will be machine carved. Now obviously I'm not going to be doing a great deal of talking while I'm carving because it's quite noisy, so I'll probably have to turn the machine off. But what I'll do is I'll do an area and then stop and explain it, and then we can go on from there. And if anyone wants to come up and have a closer look at that time, then we'll do that. Okay? So first of all, I'm going to start off. There's some old cut areas here, here and here. I'm going to start hollowing those out, and this top area here is a little bit flat, so I'll create some rot and some damage in this area. There's some lovely old, I don't know if you can see this, but very close up you've got some beautiful cracks going on in this deadwood. You know, as much as I try and make it look as natural as possible, Mother Nature does a better job than I do. So leaving the wood to mature after the work is done is a good idea. So I tend to leave wood to the elements, to the sun, the rain. You don't get snow here, but you know, the cold weather, the expansion and contraction of the wood helps to age it. So I tend to leave it for a year or two to the elements before I think about any treatment. Because the wood doesn't have resins as such, you have to use something like a wet rock wood hardener for it to persist a long time. Okay. I'll try not to set the fire alarms on. Because it's old, dry and hard, it will smoke a bit. Looks dramatic.
What's the point on the drill? I mean, what's the...
Show it to the camera.
A lot of these bits are carbide burrs, made by an American company called Sabertooth. Can you see that? This one's full of soot, but that's a better example. You can see it's got it's like a little hedgehog. So some of them have cutting cups like this. You can see has little cups that you can, once they get blunt, you can just turn them round slightly. They're quite vicious, but these tend to be quite easy to use. They don't tend to skip through the wood, so they're very good. Another important bit is if you do make holes in the tree, you don't want areas where they'll sit wet. So if you can find a way of getting the water to exit the tree as quickly as possible, that's good also. I'm just going to swap this for a slightly larger. I tend to use gym pliers to change the tools because the tools can get quite warm. Fortunately, this wood is nice and hard. You know, sometimes it can get a bit soft, and that can create problems in itself. But you don't get a lot of rain in it, so. So I'm just eliminating the flat cut. And creating a little bit of depth.
Will, did you ever think about being a dentist?
Yeah. It's funny, every single job I've ever done has been, well, apart from the probation service, when I was a thatcher, I was always covered in dirt and mess. And now again, it's always dusty and smoky. And
I'm assuming you can only do that in deadwood areas?
well, you can create shari from live wood. I tend to, any block carving, the bigger work, I tend to do on green wood. But any detailing work is best done on seasoned wood. It holds the detail better. Green wood tends to be a bit fluffy and doesn't hold the detail quite so well. So you see there, the smoke is coming out of this hole now. So I've joined that up, so water doesn't sit in there, it'll flow through to here, and then it'll exit at the bottom here. And this extension that I have on the Dremel, this isn't a standard, this is an extra to the Dremel, but it's very useful if you have got awkward areas to work around. You can get in without the body of the tool getting in the way. So what I've done here is just added a few heavy lines to start off with. I've broken up those flat areas, just step them up and down a bit. What I'll now do is, it's new wood, if you take the bark of a tree, tends to be round. The older it gets, the more rippled it gets. It's a bit like an old table. It's been polished and polished and polished. All the knots will not rise up, but all the softwood will disappear. And it's the same in nature. You know, the rain will wash the soft areas away, and the harder areas will stand proud. So what I'll now do is go in between those and just dish it out slightly. It looks very heavy at the moment, but as time goes on, you'll see how much it will change.
Could you tell us where that saucer bit comes from? I couldn't find one.
Yeah, it's Samurai Tools Netherlands. If you go, try and Google that, Samurai, is it Samurai Bonsai Tools or Samurai Tools NL? It'll have a link to a company that in Florida that uses their bits, that sells their bits, and you might find it. It's called a knife edge burr. So again, this is a saber tooth, one of the saber tooth tools called a mini rotor saw. Has the little pimples on it, and I just use that to dish out to make it slightly concave in between the heavier lines that I put in here. Okay, the detail work does take a long time. Especially when the wood is as hard as this is. So once I've done the concave areas, then I go back in with the knife edge burr again, the one that made the heavy lines, and we do some lighter lines in between those, and keep it as random as possible. So, you know, some of these lines might look a little bit even. They're kind of parallel, but they start and stop in places, it looks a bit more natural. But the smaller lines will really help to detail and make it look a lot older. That's the idea anyway. very easy. You know, a lot of these tools make round marks. Holes in trees don't tend to be perfectly round, they tend to be more eye-shaped, like a knot on a table. So if you can create that shape, this tool allows you just to pierce through, just to open up areas a little bit so it's not quite so round. But these are just very, very, very light touches that I'm adding to the wood. And because it's kind of burning its way, it gives you a good contrast to start off with. But within a very, very thin silk that's left behind, so it will disappear within a year or so. Okay. And I also try and keep in line with the grain. If you don't, and that's another reason for you to work with seasoned wood, is it will crack slightly, so it will show you the direction you need to be going. If you try and detail green wood, it's very difficult to see, and also the tool wants to slide around a bit in the wetter wood. Because you are working with dry wood, it's very difficult to plan exactly how the wood is going to finish up. Because bits will chip off, you know, if it is rotten. So once the smaller lines go in, then I go over the whole lot with a worn out rotary wire brush. So a normal one, they're usually a full size one is more like that, but I wait until they're worn right down, more like that, and it'll just soften the edges of the wood. New wood tends to be sharp and jagged, whereas the older it gets, the softer it gets. And you use it on a slightly slower speed, just take the hard edges. So the other thing I tend to do is heavily detail around features, and if you detail everything all the way down, it tends to get a bit busy. So heavily detail around the features, and then a certain amount of lines between the features that kind of tie them in together. And I kind of equate it to a cartoon of someone running past a wall. They tend to highlight a few bricks. You don't see all the bricks, you just see a few to understand that it's to understand it's a wall. And it's a similar thing to that. You say too much detail and it gets a bit too busy. So that's more or less finished on that section. So what I'll do is carry on and do this top section. So you see all the flat areas have gone. Also they're not round, it's kind of slightly randomized. So what I've done in here is I've gone in quite deeply, eliminated the flat cut again, but also hollowed down slightly. Now, because I've set up a water trap in here, I've kind of feathered the hole from the back towards the front, and then I can use the knife edge burr just to cut through, and it'll let the water out the front. So you're kind of giving the appearance that it's hollow when in fact it's not really. But you can see how taking the wood out either side just pronounces and gives a better depth even to the surface of the wood. So as you can see here, heavily detailed around that area, and then although it is detailed, it's a lot less detailed in this area, just to tie those areas together. So that's more or less done there, so I'll just carry down into this section here. We've got a hole to deal with here, a couple of owl holes here to deal with. How is it different? Well, because there's a lot of sap in the wood, it's very difficult to see the direction of the grade. So if you've got any hollowing to do, or if you want to reduce the profile of, let's say if it's a large cut branch and you want to reduce the profile of it, then do it when it's green. It's nice and easy. It's like carving cheese, really. And then let it season. You can stick it on the bench. You can look at it. I like that bit. I don't like that bit. You know, you can choose to change it, or just wait for it to.
Dry is easier to work with, though.
Yeah, it's harder, physically harder, but it's the detail will show up a lot crisper.
Maybe you could repeat my question, but if you get too close to the live bark, will it try to grow over if you nick it?
Yes. It's quite. If I damage any live wood anywhere, it'll heal over quite quickly. Well, a lot of that is dependent on how many branches and how vigorous the tree is. But you know, sometimes part of the tool will rub against the bark. You know, you might lose a bit of bark, or you might actually go into the cambium, especially when it's quite calloused anyway. So some areas I'm having to, the callus is almost in the way to do the work. The earlier you can do your deadwood work, the better. You know, if you've just collected a tree, before you've built all your structure on your branches, it's best to get any deadwood work done before you build.
You don't want the cambium to start growing over your deadwood. So, I mean,
Well, you know, when you get this callus growing up, depending on the species, you know, some species will never callus and cover. If you were working with larch, you know, you can make a shari in a trunk and it can callus over quite quickly. So you have to keep re-scarring it and opening it up, which can be a nice feature. You know, if you get a callus that rolls in and then you remove part of the callus and then it rolls in again, you create this kind of stepped illusion, and it looks like a tree has died over many years rather than just one event that did the work. So if you can create different ages of deadwood and different ages of callus, then you know it all tells a longer term story to a tree and gives it a greater appearance of age. You know.
great.
So again, I'm just going over the work I've done and just softening those hard edges.
biggest mistake people make trying to do this?
I would say removing too much. You know, people get a bit carried away with Makita, and they'll often hollow right into a tree and not leave a lot of wood on the front of the tree, and that can create. If it's gone, it's gone. You can't put it back. It's really important when you design a bonsai. You can often see a back branch from the front, so it gives it that sense of depth. And it's the same with the carving. So you have wood at the front. It should remain, and you create shadow and depth behind that wood. So it's really important to leave a surface, the front part of the wood. You can make a hole, but preserve some of the front, and then make another hole and join them up behind, rather than just make one big shari that goes all the way through. It's also important if you're making a hole in the tree. You've got to get the water out of the tree, but also you don't really want to see the sides of the hole. So what I tend to do is balloon it on the inside. So you go in with the tool and then work around, and it creates a good amount of shadow and also the illusion that the whole tree is hollow. If you can see the sides of the wall, then it doesn't really, it's not very convincing. Okay, we're more or less done. Just a quick polish to finish off. And you're more than welcome to come up and have a look.
That's amazing.
You like it?
Yeah.
As I say, Mother Nature on top of this. A few years left for it to not only crack this way, but you get these little lateral cracks. You can probably see just on the sides here, you get these tiny cracks that go this way. It makes all the difference. Wood removal really. And if there's ever areas, say if you've got a couple of features close together, and it's very difficult to put the lines in exactly where you want them, then just leave it and let Mother Nature do it. That's what I do anyway. So as you can see, again, it's heavily detailed around certain areas, around the features, and then just a few lines to tie it in together. Okay. So I think we're finished really on that.